Greetings everyone, this is National Master Jonathan Hilton, here today with another forward chess moment. I wanted to share with you a cool game that I found in the book Improve Your Chess Pattern Recognition by a Dutch international master named Arthur van der Oudeweetering. I'll go to a spot that I have bookmarked right now. The game is Ljubojevic-Seirawan, Tilburg, 1983. The theme of this particular chapter of Oudeweetering's book is the presence of black's bishop on the c8 square. Although the bishop is often trapped on c8 behind a pawn chain, it does serve some important strategic defensive purposes. And this game highlights exactly how important that this light-squared bishop, often the so-called bad bishop or problem child of the French defense, can be. So the game starts out with a French defense, and black plays a Winnower. White locks the center with e5, and black plays a move that's not too unusual, but it's definitely a sideline nowadays. It's the move queen d7. Much more common would be for black to strike at the pawn chain with the move c5. But the purpose of this move queen d7 is to allow black to control the light squares, particularly b5. And as you'll see, his plan is to play the move b6, and then bring his bishop to a6 in order to trade off the problem child bishop on c8. White plays queen g4. This is a great move, very aggressive. Often when black's bishop comes out to b4 in these structures, the g7 pawn is weak, so it makes sense for white to tickle that. Black plays f5, defending the g7 pawn with the help of his queen. White plays queen g3. And now black starts on his plan to trade off light-squared bishops. White develops a strong attack on the king side, though. He plays knight to h3 with the idea of knight to f4 followed by knight to h5. Black plays a5. This is a preparatory move for bishop to a6. White continues with knight f4. Black plays queen f7 to prevent knight to h5. Here, white puts the question to black's bishop. Black is happy to exchange his bishop for white's knight because his position is cramped. Unfortunately, though, for black, the bishop on b4 was his good bishop, and now he's only stuck with his bad light-squared bishop on c8. No problem, black says. I will play bishop to a6. This makes sense. This is black's plan. Black doesn't see the problem with trading off his dark square bishop if he's also going to get to trade off his light square bishop. But unfortunately for black, the move bishop to a6 is a blunder, and it allows white a very nice shot to break through. So if you would like, you can pause your video now and try to figure out how white took advantage of black's mistake. Okay, ready? So white begins with a fairly straightforward bishop takes a6. But then after rook takes a6, note of course not knight takes a6, because then white would play queen to c6 check, forking black's king and rook. So after bishop takes a6, black must play rook takes a6. But here, white sacrifices a knight with knight takes e6. While black must take, he has to accept the sacrifice, but then white plays queen takes c7. Forking black's knight on b8 and his pawn on g7. Black plays knight c6. Of course, he can't play knight to d7 because then white would have queen to c8 check, picking off the rook on a8. So, black plays knight to c6. Now white has queen takes g7. This attacks the rook on h8. Black continues with queen g6, then after queen takes h8, black plays knight to d8. Black's idea appears to be very strong at first blush. Black is going to play knight to f7, trapping white's queen. Note, however, that there are a couple of key, very critical lines here. Queen takes g2 looks tempting. However, white has a very strong response to this. He plays bishop to g5. Now, if black were to simply play queen takes g5, then white would play king to f1, and white has a couple of pawns and a rook for 2 knights, but he has a very strong attack. He's going to play rook to g1. Black's knight on g8 is in a lot of trouble, so white is winning in this position. So this just leaves the sacrifice this just leaves black the possibility of accepting the double rook sacrifice with queen takes h1. White would play king d2, and black would grab this rook. But unfortunately for black, white now is going to finish black off with a checkmate like this. Pawn to e6 check, and then the king has to run like this. White can simply continue to snake up the board like this until finally black is going to find himself running into checkmate very soon here. So if we just go back through all of these moves, we find that queen takes g2 doesn't work after bishop g5. So at the time this game was played, the commentator suggested that perhaps black should try the move pawn to h5. This is a tricky idea. Black's going to play rook to a7 and then rook to h7, trapping white's queen. But here, the computers have just found the move pawn to g4. And this just allows white to consolidate. The idea is fairly simple. By playing the move g4, offering this pawn sacrifice, what white's really doing is finding a way to close off the g-file. For instance, of course, if black were to play queen takes g4, I'll just go ahead and put on Stockfish for a minute, where you can see it appears that just about anything for white wins here. But after, say, bishop to e3, this is what Stockfish recommends, white's going to be able to get his king out, say, to d2, and then he'll swing a rook over to g1, and again, white's crashing through on the g-file, and white has a very strong attack against black. So the move g4 is very strong, and white should win here with no problem. So if we go back, this is why Seirawan played the move knight to d8, just trying to trap the white queen with knight to f7 right away. But of course this runs into the same problem, more or less, that queen takes g2 does. White plays bishop h6, and the idea is that white has a creative move that he can play to use his bishop to penetrate black's position. Black plays b5 here. Now, of course, if he plays knight to f7, white can play queen g7, getting his queen out, and then suppose that black does take the bishop. Even though black has 2 knights for the rook here, white still has all 8 of his pawns, and that leaves him a pretty decisive advantage, particularly considering the strong position of his pawn on e5. So white should win this endgame. So just going back, this is why Seirawan played b5, trying to free up his rook on e6 to come into the game. However, white continued with bishop to g7. This is a very strong and powerful move. White's threatening queen takes g8. So black has to play something to defend his knight, king f7 being the best move. Note that this takes the f7 square away from black's knight. So now white continues simply with bishop to f6. White is crashing through on the dark squares. Black tries to consolidate his position, get some activity, but white continues to push through on the king side. Black plays rook to c6, again trying to drum up some counterplay, but white comes first. And here after queen to h6, white's able to consolidate with a simple move, pawn to c3. forming a powerful pawn chain from b2 all the way into e5. Black is running out of chances here. Rook to c8 is an attempt to trap white's queen again. You notice a move knight to e7 may be on the way. But white doesn't care. He plays f4, continuing the attack. And here you'll notice that if black were to play knight to e7, white has the intermezzo, bishop to g5. So black threatens white's queen, white threatens black's queen, and then white's queen is able to back out to f6. So black accepts the pawn with knight takes f4. And then here, a move that I find, again, to be very powerful and just very artistic even, white simply castles. This appears to be almost castling into black's counterplay, but white's rook on f1 is going to be so strong against black's king on f7 that this will hardly matter. Black plays knight to e2 check. But again, white's able to defend well, and the rook on f1 needs to come out and attack this black king on f7, so what does white do? He plays g4. Black has little choice but to play f takes g4, and now bishop to g5. Again, very powerful. Black plays queen takes g5, and now white plays king to g3. So again, white has cleared up that f-file, and he's going to come down and mate black. Black holds on for a few more moves, but there really isn't much point at this point. The game continued for just a couple moves more, and then in this position, you see that black resigned. So I find this to be a very compelling example of how black's bishop on c8, particularly in these Slavs or French defenses, can play an important role in guarding the pawn on e6 and really just shoring up black's entire position in general. So even though we're often taught that we need to exchange that bishop off right away, black should always be careful when doing so not to allow a tactical shot like what happened in this game. So I hope you enjoyed this game, and I will see you again on the next Forward Chess Moment.